Good afternoon. Welcome to the Nebraska State Historical Society's Museum of Nebraska History and our October 2004 Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name is Deb Arns, and I'm the Senior Museum Curator here, and I'm proud to introduce today's speaker. And our topic is Cowboys and Indians, Western Mythology on the Nebraska Roadside. I do want to mention before I introduce Carol, our speaker, that funding is provided for taping of this program by the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation. Carol Ahlgren is the architectural historian with the National Park Service Midwest Regional Office in Omaha. And before holding her current position, she spent 10 years as an architectural historian and historic buildings survey coordinator for the Nebraska State Historical Society. She is a former Nebraska director of the National Lincoln Highway Association, has served on the board of the Preservation Association of Lincoln, and is a co-founder of 2020 Omaha, a recent past advocacy group, and is a co-founder of this and is also still involved. Carol has given numerous presentations on the local and national level on a variety of topics, including historic highways and recent past resources. So please help me in welcoming Carol Ahlgren.
Just a second, I gotta put this on. Cover the cameras while I do that. Okay, there we go. Well, thank you all for coming. It's fun to be back here doing another talk. As Deb said, I did work for the Society. Actually, it was 11 years, but I don't want to think I'm that old, so we'll say 10. Sounds better. And so I had a lot of opportunity then to drive around Nebraska, and of course I was studying highways both as part of the job and kind of on my own. And so I'd think about all these things too. So this has kind of been simmering for a while. But I should say right now, and I'll probably say it again, these do not reflect the views of the National Park Service. So this, I don't know if anyone there would agree with what I'm about. So anyway, let's see, as the poster, I want to thank you. That was a great poster. I'm going to have to take one of those back with me. I'm going to look at the popular culture and of the 50s and 60s with the westerns and some of the cowboy kitsch, but also then how this is reflected in the roadside. And it's not just Nebraska. You can see this all over the country. I mean, there's like Indian teepees in New York State, and there's western theme parks. But it really was a phenomenon that is kind of dying out, at least in this country. And the artifacts, of course, are now highly collectible. Just try and buy a cowboy bedspread. You aren't going to find it for a very low price. But in the westerns, those are also past. I mean, there's very few westerns on television anymore. In fact, I can't even think of one, maybe Deadwood. But those have been supplanted by, well, here, let's have the first slide. Those have been supplanted by, cop shows, by doctor shows, and of course by lawyer shows. Well, these are, though, great images, and I think for some of us, and I'm going to date myself, there is a certain nostalgia with this stuff, the wagons and the forts and the, playing cowboys and Indians, and that's why I said it that way. And it is part of our culture. I mean, there was a West, but I mean, it starts getting a little more complex than that. And I think we always need to be reinterpreting our history. Well, between 1950 and the mid-1970s, there were at least 120, I think, westerns that were on television. So it's pretty remarkable when you think of that. I mean, we just were saturated with this in our culture. Some of them were very long-term, like Wagon Train, I think was one of the ones that was around the longest. And some didn't even last, for a season. Well, in Gunsmoke, The Virginian, trying to think of some other ones, The Good Guys, The Bad Guys, The White Hats. And generally, of course, it was Guy's World. Here's Bonanza. But Little Joe did get all the chicks, such as they were. And the Lone Ranger, of course, is unusual in that Jay Silverheels, Tonto, was a real Indian, or at least he was half Native American, and he played a lead role, and that was really quite unusual. But for some of us, you think of the phrase like hi-ho Silver or calling your friends Kimosabi. And it's kind of frightening to realize, too, that the actor, I can't remember his name, that played the Lone Ranger, I think he died in that mask. I mean, he wouldn't stop wearing it, so, it's like, well, anyway. And Roy Rogers, of course, claimed to be king of the Cowboys, and, I sort of doubt that. I mean, I suppose he knew how to ride that horse, but there is one thing for sure, he was king of the cowboy outfits. I mean, you look at these pictures, he had the best clothes. Well, what about interiors? This was a covered wagon room that used to be in Reno, Nevada at Harold's Club. And this is like a fabulous combination of boomerang, 50s boomerang and Western. I mean, wouldn't you just love to, you know, sit on one of those bar stools? And then in the background, there was a mural of Nevada with the historic trails that were in electric lights. So you sit there and stare at that. Unfortunately, this has long been either remodeled or demolished. Hang on, switch. By the 1960s, Westerns, of course, start to begin being parodied. Bonanza was really rare in that it lasted until the probably early 70s. But then we also had F Troop. I don't know if some of you remember that. And then more socially and historically critical portrayals of, you know, this period of our time, which also reflect the time that they were being made. For example, the movie Little Big Man, or the TV show Kung Fu, which is one of my favorites. And Michael Landon, of course, goes on to produce and star in Little House on the Prairie, a television show, which is, again, though, it is pioneers. It's kind of Western, but it's about family values. And I didn't watch it because I read the books. But we looking back to the 19th century, of course, that's, you know, an idea that, well, and we do sort of mythologize, I'm not going to be able to say that word, mythicize things, safety assurance, or we can even look back now at the 50s and say, you know, it was a great time, it was our childhood, there were great cars, there was great furniture. But in reality, I think maybe we look back, like when we were looking back to the 19th century, because the present was probably a little too scary. And this is one of the most famous postcards of the era showing Las Vegas Vic. And of course, people, you know, criticize us now because he has a cigarette in his mouth. It's like, I think what's a little more scary is the mushroom cloud behind him. And that was from one of the many, many, many atomic tests that were being done probably 60 miles from Las Vegas at the Nevada test site. Well, and then there's the Cowboy kitch, the lamps, the bedspread, the toys, the dishes. You know, and I have some of this myself. And who wouldn't feel nostalgic looking at this and you remember Grandma baking cookies and then you go to the cookie teepee. But I think it's kind of interesting, there's little white kids coming out of the teepee. And they seem to be wearing sunglasses, which I can't figure out. Maybe they were looking at that nuclear flash. I don't know. Well, of course, you didn't have to be anywhere near the West to be part of this, and most people weren't. These two Wisconsin cowgirls, and that is me on the right. For example, we didn't have a horse or even so much as a pony on our farm, but what we did instead, we named our swings. That's a windbreak. The swings over there, and my siblings are all in dispute about this, but you know, I know I'm right. One of them was painted, someone, it had to have been one of the taller kids, painted the word silver and then trigger. And you always fought to get on silver, and then of course you could jump off and, you know, yell stuff. Anyway, but it's also kind of neat too. I like this picture because I'm serious for once, and I'm also looking west. Maybe not towards Nebraska, but I am looking west in that picture. Well, as far as the Native American stuff, this, you know, I've looked at a lot of road maps in my day, and I started noticing that, you know, Native Americans are on them, but they're always dressed, well, pretty similar with this buckskin, no matter what state it's in. And they're always pointing the way west. They look, you know, the noble, savage kind of thing. Of course, you know, a Native American wouldn't be driving a car, right? And it's so absurd. But it does become part of the iconography. And they, on these maps, are, you know, basically part of the scenery. And it can also be that real Indians become part of the roadside experience. You could buy your moccasins, your rubber tomahawk, some postcards, and see real Indians, as you could do in Ogallala. And this is probably from the late 50s. And the vacation west, both in actuality and how it's portrayed, is definitely as a white middle-class experience. And in reality, it was probably much more complex than that. Well, Nebraska provides a great place to study this sort of thing because, well, we claim to be where the West starts, and actually it probably does. We've got 3 major transcontinental highways, old federal highways, one being the Lincoln Highway, which is the, where is this thing going? There it is. Main corridor, the Great Platte River Road from Omaha, basically Cheyenne. Route 6 is in the Republican River Valley, not Red Cloud, Hastings. I don't know why they left McCook off this map. And then further north along the Niobrara River is Route 20. And all of these have some great roadside stuff along them, including Western things. Well, some of the Western roadside attractions were very ephemeral. I love that word, but it's actually a way, in this case, of saying cheap and shoddily constructed. And this was Jerome's teepee, which was really popular. I mean, there were a lot of postcards made of it. I did find, of course, there's a little stuffed pony you can get on and have your picture taken or whatever. And I did find this again when I was studying Lincoln Highway, and my friend Dave and I, we were so excited. the car practically wasn't stopped. We were running towards this place. It had been moved to I-80. And so we're running to the car, like we're there, and we go in, and the first thing I saw was a guy sitting down. You could only see his eyes. And then I looked and saw the guns. And then I looked and saw the X-rated magazines. And we turned and we ran even faster back to the car. So, you know, I just get drawn in every time, you know. Well, other things were amazing for their longevity. This, the covered wagon, this is west of Kearney. I don't know if it's there anymore. It was built in the 1930s, and you can see to the right that in the 40s or 50s probably, they added this peeled log structure. But originally you walked up into the wagon, and then the souvenirs were on either side. And this was photographed by the New Deal photographers of Farm Security Administration, so it's really been around for a long time. But I get a kick out of this one too. Okay, so here's Route 30, Lincoln Highway to the west, and you've got this sign that says Boston. Well, it's near the 1733 ranch, which is supposedly equidistant between Boston and San Francisco. Well, so if you were going to follow this, I mean, you'd be headed towards Canada or Mexico, you know. So, but they had to have the sign to point, so I get a kick out of that. But anyway, the last I heard, and I haven't been out that way in probably a year or two, but that this was destined to end up at the Arch. So, and we're going to be discussing the Arch. Well, other things such as Ogallala's Front Street, these represent a recreation of the Old West that was probably not ever there, but if it was there, it wasn't there for very long. And so they tore down some 19th century things, in which I regret, some great highway stuff, to build this in the 1960s, to build this tourist attraction. Well, one of the most famous Western pioneer tourist attractions, of course, is Pioneer Village near Minden, Nebraska, on Route 6. And this was started by Harold Warp, who was a local farm boy, Nebraska native, became an entrepreneur in Chicago. I mean, it's just an incredible success for him. I mean, it was remarkable that he really came from, you know, that sort of background and went on to become quite successful. Well, he bought his old school in the late 1940s, and I don't know how that happened. Then I think the school got lonely or other stuff became available, and so he starts purchasing up other properties. And pretty soon, you have a depot, you have a church, a post office. And those began in 1953, and then, of course, you arrange them in a circle and landscape it, which is kind of nice, and fill them with exhibits telling the story of the West and, you know, man's progress. And they actually built a sod house in the 1950s, and I find that extremely ironic because even now there's probably something like 100 sod houses still standing in Nebraska. So at that time they were always saying, well, that was part of the frontier. They can't really, you know, it didn't fit with the image we were trying to portray here of the past or the West. So how did Harold Warp make his money? Well, in one word, plastics. He was big on flexo stuff. And I read somewhere that he had invented Jiffy Wrap, but then the idea got stolen. Well, in the late 1950s or 60s, this image, you notice that the circle here is about half full, and there's a concrete pad where I think the sod house is going to be built right there. And then the main building is oriented towards Route 6, of course. It's a great building. And there's Route 6, and then there's 2 gas stations. This one might have been owned by the Warps. But those were, of course, premier locations. Oh, hang on. Eek. All right, signage. Well, this is Nebraska's version of Sea Rock City, or Burma Shave signs. These are everywhere on the older highways, and they're staggered. And of course, they're at the scale for an older highway. The interstate, they're, you know, about the size of a barn. So you stagger along. I love this scene because it's just so Nebraska to me. You got the highway, you got the grain elevator, and then you've got those Pioneer Village signs. And these signs, again, to scale to the type of road they're on, are downright chatty. You know, come and browse our china shop. You know, see the sod house. Well, and here's another view. This is probably about mid-60s, and I'd say when they had pretty much finished getting the buildings. They added another exhibit building, main building, and let's see, what else? Well, so the circle's filled in, right? And there's, you know, another machine building, and he also built a hotel so you could stay there. Well, in 1963, Pioneer Village celebrated its 10th anniversary, and the 1 millionth visitor all the way from Paris, France. And the dad says, Mr. Prouveau, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, says, "We have seen museums in France, but nothing like these." And, you know, I want to say these kids, picture, sorry, that's my French accent. Little kids, I have 2 words to say to you: Euro Disney. Well, Governor Morrison, keep him in mind, he was the governor from 1961 to 67 during the height of all this Western popular culture and also things being built in Nebraska. He sends a telegram that says, "Pioneer Village, you have pioneered the way in telling the world about Nebraska's pioneers. Congratulations, best wishes for the future." And of course, we need to keep Governor Morrison in mind because he will become the driving force behind the Great Kearney Arch over I-80. Well, did the interstate have an impact on Pioneer Village? Oh, yes. And the problem is that it's a long 15 miles south of the interstate, and I would say don't be fooled by the minute south. I mean, I was driving down there a couple years ago. I thought, I got to turn back. And then lo and behold, I saw these signs, and I hope you can read these. I'm not able to see them. It says, right here, 4,000 wagons passed on their way west. And I thought, you know, I wonder if people are going to see that farm road and think that that was the actual wagon trail. I don't know. But I could almost feel nostalgic about Pioneer Village. There's old souvenirs for sale. I bought some of the materials for this talk in there. And there were only about, I hate to say it, a dozen people there in the week I visited. And these exhibits really don't look like they've been changed. There's 1950s display cases. I just love this. And there's no one here from the Preservation Office, but they should know this. This is 50 years old, so it's now eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. And I think it should be listed. Well, the staff was wonderful. I didn't make an appointment. Here's after you walk out, I'm walking in towards a circle here, and there's a pioneer stockade. But anyway, they just brought out tons of material for me to use and look at. And it's still used as a tourist attraction. This I find to be a confusing message, and maybe it's just me. Buffalo Bill, ever the pioneer, spends a day looking at the plains. P-L-A-N-E-S. It's supposed to be I. Am I thinking too hard? And then it's America's Frontier, and then the thing that kind of. Is anyone here from the tourism board? I hope not. Anyway, then Genuine Nebraska. One of my friends saw this, said, "Will you take me to the fake Nebraska?" I was like, great. But anyway, this is appropriate, though, because ironically, and Buffalo Bill, or appropriately, he probably did more than any single person to mythologize the West. He had his Wild West show, which ran from 1883 to 1916, and millions of people saw it. And yes, it was a blend of kind of fact, fiction, and above all, entertainment. And North Platte was indeed his hometown, Scouts Rest. There was at one time a huge ranch. And during Frank Morrison's governorship in 1963, the state bought the property and opened it as a museum attraction, which is really quite nice. Buffalo Bill, however, was seldom there because he was busy with his traveling show, hanging out at the Paxton Hotel in Omaha, and avoiding his wife. There was quite an acrimonious divorce that kind of made the North Platte papers quite a bit. Well, once upon a time, there was an arch on Route 30. This is really pretty cool. Of course, it's not there. And North Platte long used its, home of Buffalo Bill to promote themselves. And Buffalo Bill, of course, would have been proud of that. It's like, yeah, use it. And of course, the association with Buffalo Bill, again, this is an attraction that was on Route 30, western part of North Platte. They operated Fort Cody. This is a Henline family. And they had started with the Sioux trading post that we saw earlier in the picture of Ogallala with the real Indians. Well, they had a great location here on Route 30, not too far from Scouts Rest. And you see the guard towers and the, soldiers. And it's still there. I found it when I was studying Lincoln Highway. And until a couple years ago, or probably 5 years ago, the guard towers were still there, which is kind of entertaining. And another view, I went out around back, and there were the frame cutouts where you could stick your face and have your picture taken. I was thinking, God, these would look so great in my yard. I thought, you are not resorting to stealing. And then someone said, well, why didn't you go ask them if you could buy them? But I was driving to Colorado, and I didn't have rope to tie it to my car. And it was getting late, so it was just kind of, I left them there. Well, then, this is pretty interesting. The Henline family, on the same trip, I stopped in at Fort Cody along the interstate. I mean, somehow they ended up with the best piece of real estate. I mean, this is right at the North Platte interchange. And I just walked in there and said, does anyone know the history of this place? And this woman just pointed at this guy behind the counter, and he said, yeah, my dad built it. So as I interviewed him, we had a blast. Well, he said that his dad knew that the interstate was coming, did manage to get this land, and just decided to expand and build this huge new fort. I mean, contrast with the one we saw on Route 30. And of course, you have to have a really big sign so you can see it from the interstate. And notice it says souvenirs, tourist information. They hired high school kids and stuff to work there. And notice the towers, there was one at each corner, so there's actually 4. And the rear ones were an apartment for the Whitecalf family who danced there every summer. And Chuck's dad would drive up to the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota and bring him to North Platte. And then the family would get in a convertible, I think, and they would drive around to motels, literally drumming up business. You know, they were pounding on this drum. So, and there's that big sign. Oh, and I should point out, too, that Chuck pointed out, and he was very serious, which I didn't laugh till I got to my car. He said, well, we got rid of the word souvenirs because we didn't want it to sound like a tourist trap. So, and then I asked, I said, well, where'd your dad get the idea for this? And he said, you know, 4 words, turned on the TV. And then he set up, Chuck must be in his early 50s, I think. He set up his toy Ford Apache on the dining room table, and that's where he sort of started sketching out models of how he's going to do this. Well, and here the current brochure is kind of F Troop, you know, Indian fights or colorful sights, nobody gets a licking. And they did, the fort is surrounded by wagons, kind of in a circle. And I did note, though, however, though, which is interesting because I knew someone that wrote a book on this, there's an actual sheep herder's wagon in there. It's not a covered wagon, it's something else entirely. So if you look closely, you'll find that one out there. One of my friends stopped here as a kid in 1971. He had his picture taken. He loaned me this. In the stockade, where the jail and some other things are. He didn't remember the dancers, so perhaps they're gone by that time. They worked there until, I believe, about 75, 76. It would be really interesting to interview them. Chuck said they thought it was a great job. Well, that's what he was telling me. But I think once his father died, that the relationship with that family probably, or maybe the grandfather of that family also died. I'm not sure. Or maybe it was no longer politically correct to do this. And speaking of Native Americans, this is the Indian is out in the stockade. Was originally, this is a muffler man. In case anyone doesn't know what these are, you see where the hands are? There's even a website called mufflerman.com or something. You can see where they are all over the country. And this was in there, and it's pretty interesting. But so, like any good story, this involved, let's see, I think a bar, a flippant comment, money, because this thing was down the road at a garage. And the next day, Chuck said, here's the muffler man. So they put him out and sort of Indianized him. So these are not moccasins, those are actually wingtips. And if you look really close, you can see he's still got his bow tie. And I said to Chuck, how did you get those braids? He said, oh, we just painted some rope. So I'm kind of fond of this muffler man. Well, Chuck, meanwhile, has said that, you know, the current generation has no identification with Westerns. But he said that some of his customers are people bringing their children in, and they come in and say, God, this is just like I remember. And he said to me, I wonder, is that good or bad? And I said, good. It's all good, Chuck. It's good. Well, this brings us to the great Platte River Road Arch. Governor Morrison, of course, he left us with, and these are all good things, I think, in some ways, Front Street, Buffalo Bills Ranch, numerous trail designations, and the State Centennial, which featured a covered wagon as a logo. I really don't want the quarter to have a wagon on it, but who am I to say? Anyway, all these things seem to have simmered in his mind until he had the idea that they should all be interpreted in one place. The great Platte River Road Arch, to tell about the trails. Nebraska is the most historic place on earth, from the pioneers to the Indians to the Mormons, the Transcontinental Railroad, Pony Express, Lincoln Highway, and, I'm not sure I'd get this one, the fiber optic line. That's a little obscure for me. Anyway, but why, and this again is my opinion, why an arch needed to be built to tell this when you can see it driving Route 30 or getting off the road or going to some of our fine, you know, local and county museums. But anyway, so you go inside and there are people dressed up as interpreters, sunbonnets and buckskin. And if you don't want to go, Deer and Dugu, you can see it in Alexander Payne's movie about Schmidt. So I don't know if anyone's seen that. The Jack Nicholson character rides up the elevator and walks through the arch. Has anyone seen this movie? You're supposed to laugh. Anyway, and yeah, it is Deer and Dugu, the brave pioneers. I mean, it's really, it's pretty interesting. Well, the amazing thing to me about the arch is, well, that it got built. It's pretty much, to me, the same mythology of the West, maybe a little bit more politically correct. But instead of beside the old highway or beside the interstate, it is over the interstate. And that, to me, is the novelty of this. And it made Newsweek. And I have to add, I personally know people living in Nebraska who vowed they would leave if this got built. Yes, I'm one of them. Anyway, Well, actually, the early promotional material is kind of appropriate, and maybe it's ironic. It kind of reminds me of the things that were being peddled in Europe in the 19th century. They said, rain follows a plow. You know, you can live out here and farm. You know, it'll rain, you know, before the 30s hit. And they say that the arch would have more visitors than Yellowstone National Park. Well, I think if you counted every car and assumed there were 4 people and did the math, I don't know. But this drawing, though, this kind of bothers me in a way. This is what I was hoping it would be. I don't know if you can see this. There's like wagons in a circle, woohoo. There's a little train ride, just all kinds of cool stuff. You know, maybe they'd have people popping out to scare you. I would love it. Yeah, wagon circle, and this, you can't read the text there probably, but supposedly there was a place where kids could stick their heads up into a real prairie dog town. So they have these bubbles, and you stick your head up and you see prairie dogs. And that's why I said, I want to go to that arch. Well, that isn't the arch that got built. So, and I was thinking, you know, you'd be in like little wagon carts, and then buffalo would stampede, you'd duck, and, you know, Indians would try and scalp you. But that doesn't happen. And there are people there that do interpretation. Well, no, they aren't interpreting because there's nothing to interpret. There aren't any artifacts. So they stand around. I really felt bad for them in a way. And, you know, I got in there, you know, the arch, my idea of the arch. And so I went up in the elevator with this friend of mine, and there was someone over in the corner, like dressed in buckskin. They stood up, and I screamed. And I thought, well, this is where, you know, I get scalped or something, you know. And this kid's like, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry. He was cleaning. There was nothing else for him to do. So I don't know. And then I said to him there, and of course they looked at me like, leave now. They didn't say that. But I said, okay, so we're interpreting, you know, this whole period and up through Lincoln Highway. I said, where are the people with the goggles and the, you know, driving stuff that would have been driving Lincoln Highway? And, you know, where are the people in the 50s cars or whatever? And they just looked at me like they didn't say anything. They just kind of melted away. So I don't know. But I think it's a good question. Why aren't we interpreting the 20th century if we're interpreting all of it? Well, anyway, it opened in the year 2000. It cost something like $66 million to build. My friend Lyle Henry, who's a kind of a roadside scholar, said, and I think this is such a good perspective, and I do agree with him. He said, it can best be understood as an attempt at a traditional tourist trap disguised as an educational experience and monument to the hardy pioneers. As such, it's not bad, although not as much fun as Rapid City's reptile gardens. What diminished my enjoyment was the thought of what else, for example, a genuine museum archive could have done with the $66 million, and also what kind of tourist trap could have done for a lot less money. So, well, with all due respect to Governor Morrison, I believe that since his death, a library has been established at the Arch, and he did much to promote Nebraska, but the Arch, I mean, we have to admit it, has been controversial. And just the other night at my book club in Omaha, we got on this subject, because I'm, you know, sort of obsessed about giving this talk, and my friend Cecilia, whose ancestors had lived in a dugout in western Nebraska, homesteaded out there, she said they would be turning in their graves at the sight of it. And she hasn't been inside, but she said aesthetically she doesn't like it. And then Shirley, another woman in the group who stopped by with relatives, she said she thought it was a wonderful experience, very educational. And I sort of let the conversation stop by then because I see it's going to get heated. Well, attendance has not been, here's a nice image of the signage. The attendance has not been what was projected. I mean, there have not been millions stopping every year. The building is quite lovely with the stone and wood, but of course those logs are not from Nebraska. They came all the way from the West Coast, Washington State, I think. And you know, part of the problem, everyone says, is that it doesn't have an exit ramp. Well, it was known that that was not going to be built when the arch was built, so that was a very calculated risk that was. And anyway, the other thing is psychologically, I think it's tough, and I do this myself, to turn back when you're heading, especially if you're driving across I-80, you know, to psychologically turn around and go back to anything. You know, it's like if you're going to plan to go there. So some of my friends and I would do this in the car a couple of years ago. Someone pretends they're the dad driving, you know, and someone's in the back seat and they pretend your kids are fussing. I want to go to the arch. I want to go to the arch. And then you start timing. Okay, 1001, 1002, 1003, and then you don't turn back. So it's kind of a fun little arch game to play. Well, I haven't read my, and here's part of the road going back towards the arch. I haven't read anything for a while. They've got a new manager who sounds pretty competent. The gift shop is focusing on Nebraska items, and it's actually a really good bookstore, or gift shop. I bought, you know, a couple books there. Bought a friend of mine a cowboy hat, but they also had things like, and this really puzzled me. There were Indian headdresses, you know, like the ones you had as kids with colored feathers, but these were either in pink, feathers or in blue feathers. I thought, man, we're going back to this sort of, roll thing. Interesting. Well, yeah, as I said, it's been controversial. They've said that it's lost money. And there were a lot of editorials, some of you probably saw when it opened, that people were proposing, some of them were really funny, saying it should be a casino. No hog confinement, grain storage. Well, I think the current plans, though, are, here's another view, I-80, to make it more educational. As I've said, I would prefer something more roadside-y with little wagons and, your car could, if you're in a wagon, it could change into a car on the Lincoln Highway. It would just be fun. And I think that would be a much more appropriate 21st century version of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. But on the other hand, it wouldn't be educational, and it probably wouldn't be very politically correct unless you present it as myth. And see, I'm just thinking too much. No one's going to go with that. But the arch has, as I said earlier, taken the roadside attraction to the next level, and that, to me, in and of itself is significant, that it's over the road, but still pretty much interpreting that same Western history. And I think, though, maybe it needs to look elsewhere for visitors. Here's something to think about. A couple months ago in the New York Times travel section, there was this huge article about the American-inspired 1950s and 60s Wild West towns in Europe. I mean, it's just, they're huge successes in like the Czech Republic and Germany. They're just crazy about the American West. So, and I sort of wondered, well, I wonder if Buffalo Bill's, traveling show, which went all over Europe, had anything to do with this. So perhaps we need to get Europeans to start coming to our attractions. And I sadly noted that the Bonanza Ranch, which was really fun, that just closed this year. And I suspect some of our Nebraska attractions aren't doing that well either. But it's just really interesting for me to read about this mythologized West going global. And if all of ours do close, well, we can go to the Czech Republic or Germany to see our past. That's my final slide. Thank you. Sorry. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. I'm sorry, wait.
I disagree with your opinion of the archway. I know when it was being built, the Lincoln radio stations ridiculed it tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I could add would be a few more signs telling about it before you get there.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that 5 different modes of transportation come together at that area, which is history, I think is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that. And, like I said, I have friends that like the arch and friends that don't. I'm trying to sort of take it in that context of how these sort of attractions have evolved. That was kind of my point more. Anyway, but it has been controversial, and it has lost money. So, but like I said, with all due respect to Governor Morrison, and personally, I do also believe that Nebraska is, I spent 10 years driving around the state. I keep telling people, if you've been on I-80, you have not seen Nebraska, get off I-80, go north, go south, go up to the Sandhills. It's an incredible state. Thank you. Good. Well, it's true. God, it's like, I tell people that. I tell my family that. It's like, you don't know Nebraska. Just don't even talk to me until you get off the interstate. So is there any other questions? Yes, you.
Could they put a exit at the arch?
Well, I think they probably will. Maybe. Probably maybe.
Passed it several times on business, but just like you said, psychologically, I can't justify it.
I know. There's really something to that. Well, I heard that, and I don't know. I don't have the newspaper article about this, but I had heard that the city of Kearney, that was a bond issue or something, that if they would pay for it, and it got defeated like 2-1. And I don't think the Department of Roads is, they have their plan of where exits are going to be. But it could happen. It could happen. And I think that would help.
I do too.
Yes.
This is another question, but do you remember the Devil's Nest development up near the South Dakota border? Mm-hmm.
No, but I've heard about it. The Devil's Nest?
Yeah, I just wondered whatever happened to it. It was around the time that we had this gasoline shortage,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of stopped everything, I think.
Was it a tourist attraction or housing?
To be. It was
Okay.
up near the South Dakota border there. there, right.
It was sort of a resort area. It was
Yeah,
made to
yeah.
be a resort.
People were going there to live, to make
Right,
homes.
right.
Okay.
Camping and boating and.
You know, I think what I heard about this, of course, it makes me want to hop in my car, but I think I had heard that it was kind of there in ruins, and you could still see some
I saw
western.
it once when it was almost to the end of the development, when development had stopped, and it was only partially developed, really. But it was a wonderful location, and of course it did have history too, because it was presumably a place where the bandits would hole up for the winter, you see.
Very interesting. No, if I'm ever up that way, I'll have to. Devil's Nest near the South Dakota border.
The investor just pulled out.
Is that what happened? So they. Yes, sir.
North Platte was going to build a golden spike, which
That's
is
right.
a little far from Utah. But
Oh, who cares?
what do you know about that? Is that
Well, actually, that's interesting because I'm really interested in all this stuff. So I was trying to find newspaper articles on it. Supposedly, it was, that is one of the largest or the largest rail yards in America. It's pretty astonishing when you go there. And it was going to be, because everyone wants to look at train tracks, right? So it was going to be this huge tower-like thing, and then you could look down on the rail yards from there. I think they haven't been able to raise the money. Or that if they do it, it's not going to be a spike. And they're like, well, what's the point? But anyway. And there is a spike in Council Bluffs, I might add. Yeah, there's a golden spike in Council Bluffs as well.
well, wasn't somebody going to build a replica of a tornado also?
Yeah, you know what? I don't know if I have any newspaper articles about that one. I was just like, I laughed out loud. And I thought they were serious, It's like, oh, yeah, we all want to experience a tornado. I think not. I'm thankful every year I live here and there's not, the sky starts getting a little green. I'm just like, it's going to happen. It's going to have a tornado in Omaha. Oh, dear. But I live in a concrete house, so I'm fine.
Where were they gonna build this?
The tornado, I think the tornado was going to be near Nebraska City. I don't know why I think somewhere in southeastern Nebraska.
No, I'm not sure.
Yeah, relive the thrilling experience, give me a break. But that's realism, you aren't, have a cow flying by or something. Anyone else? Any other questions? Yes?
Well, just a comment, I agree with you about getting off of Interstate 80, but speaking of Fort Cody, it is rather a museum. He's quite a collector of
Yeah, he does have stuff in there.
artifacts, and I love the little miniature Buffalo Bill roadshow
Mm-hmm.
that he purchased from a man that hand carved it in Ohio some years ago, and it's all automated and it goes off I think every 15 minutes. Or
Yeah, that is cool. You're right, the Wild West show.
time and just see it.
Yeah, a little miniature. Someone, boy, they must have been in their basement a long time carving that. But so you can see the whole show. It's got the little tents and it's got the wagons and it's fascinating. Yeah, he said that when I was there, which is probably 2 years ago, he said that business really wasn't doing that well. And I don't know, I just keep thinking, stay open, stay open. And of course I looked at all this stuff, just tacky souvenirs. I didn't really buy much, but it was pretty fun.
Well, it's just kind of fun to look. 'Cause it's
Yeah,
like we see
try on the moccasins, yeah,
Who else has those?
yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
Are you familiar at all with Fort Hartsuff?
Yeah, I've been there.
It was one of the few forts that was built to protect the Indians from the Indians.
I'm sorry, sir, what?
It was built to protect the Indians from the Indians.
Oh,
The Dakota or the Sioux would come down into Nebraska because they didn't get along very well with the Pawnee. And they built the fort there to keep the Pawnee, but ride 10 miles either direction, you'd be by it, so.
yeah. And that's in, what county is that in? If anyone's
I couldn't tell
interested.
you,
Oh,
but
okay.
My brother-in-law
North and west, isn't
wrote
it?
for Reader's Digest off the beaten path.
Your valley. Okay, thank you. That's
And,
interesting.
Because there's 3 or 4 things that were like the last Indian war against the Indians was down at Massacre Canyon, which is over by McCook.
It's interesting. Anyone else? That's it. All right, thank you.